What you guys are looking at here is a piece of history. This is the earliest version of the Maddock Madstone. Now, most people know about the Madstone name being associated with American Standard as they mostly used the Madstone model, but originally this was a Maddock product until American Standard bought them out. From what I can tell though, there are supposedly 2 to 3 generations total of this being the first one ever made. Later ones would have a larger trapway and then have the octagonal base. So, think of it as you will, but today we're looking at the very first version. Beginning with the overall design, you can definitely tell it's early 1900s. This particular one is from 1924, which means probably by the time you're watching this, it's 100 years old and still here, in this particular building that is. But, I want to be honest, I kind of prefer the octagonal bases a little bit more compared to the rounded bases, but I have to admit, this looks pretty nice. Inside, there's the logo, it's Maddock. There's the trapway opening, as you can tell it's a board trap. And there are rim jets all over the bowl. You can see them here, but they're kind of more concealed under here. Let's have a look at a flush, shall we? The flush on this one is a little bit more shorter than most, but it gets the job done, I guess. In technical terms, we could kind of argue about the existence of this type of urinal, but let's be real here. This is a true beauty. I mean, how many pedestal urinals like this have you seen from the early 1900s? I bet for most of you it's not. But it is pretty cool to see one in near perfect condition. I mean, like this one has been well taken care of. And you can kind of tell this restroom has been through some renovations, most notably in the 70s. So seeing something like this here is nothing short of a miracle. This is really cool. Let's have a look at rinse. As you kind of saw there, it covers the rim pretty good. I mean, there might be some spots like kind of around here that might be a mess because some of the jets kind of go down into the opening, but it does have very good rims, especially considering the size of this thing. I'll have a look at one more angle. As you can see at the front, it has a lot of power, which is very good to help assist with the flush, even though this only handles liquids. Even though it's kind of pointless to most people now, the pedestal urinal is probably one of the coolest things I've ever seen, and you cannot deny. And that, my friends, is the first generation Maddock Madeira, a beautiful fixture. While you can argue about its existence nowadays, it's no doubt one of the coolest urinals I've ever seen, and would pave the way for the standard Madstone in the American Standard era. Without it, we wouldn't have the standard Madstone. And let's be real here, the original version is very cool and unique. Now it's time to grade it.
Beginning with the overall design, I prefer the later style of the standard Madstones over the original Maddock design. That doesn't mean that it doesn't look bad per se, but I kind of like the look of the later versions much better compared to the original version. It just looks very simplistic, even for its time. Sure, it might have a few hits of uniqueness, but still, even for its time, it's kind of basic. I'm still giving it a 7 though, because it does look pretty cool. The flush is pretty great. I mean, just take a look at the flush and I don't really need to say much about how great the flush is. It's powerful and it has a very strong siphon. It gets a 9. I was actually quite curious on how the ballrooms would be on this, but it's actually a lot better than I was expecting. The ballrooms on this is very great, with maybe missing like a few key areas, but they're kind of minimalistic and don't really matter that much. Still not incredible ballrooms per se, but pretty great, especially for a urinal this size. It gets a 9. Well, I don't think I really need to say much. This thing is very effective at doing its job. But you kind of just sit there and ponder, like, it could do a lot more. You know, it could have been more than just a urinal, but this was the past design here, and that's what they came up with. So it's perfectly effective at getting rid of liquids, like, very much so. I assume most people know that they'll be having more of an obsolete setup with a urinal like this. You know, tall flushometer, you have to have a hole in the floor, you name it. There's a lot of things you have to do for a pedestal urinal, but I assume most people know what they're getting into if they get a pedestal urinal. Which of course is not so nowadays, but I guess if you're replacing it or getting something new or a custom install, well, you can make work of what you can. It's kind of like putting in a stall urinal. Almost. It gets a 10 in effectiveness. Now it's time to talk about overall value, and it's going to get a little bit weird. We have to talk very technical, especially in terms of modern day, but let's be real here. Who's going to be buying a pedestal urinal for a new bathroom? Let's be completely real here. But let's get into it. The whole conception of pedestal urinals, if you kind of think about it, doesn't really make a lot of sense, even back in the day. These are basically undersized toilets that only function in order to remove liquids, and that's kind of it. It's got an unconventional bowl shape, and it's pretty much just an undersized toilet with a smaller trapway. We can argue about all sorts of weird quirks, especially compared to a lot of later stuff, like for example how it uses a lot more water compared to most urinals nowadays, as well as the fact that you could easily just put a toilet in its place instead of just having this oversized urinal. But I don't really think of it like that most of the time. I think of it as this, a novelty. Sure, its existence is still kind of jarring to me, but it was something of its time. Whether you like this ideal or not, it's still a relic of the past, and honestly, I gotta admire it. I definitely admire this urinal a lot more because, well, this particular urinal, the Maddock Madstone, is an antique. As I mentioned, this urinal is soon to turn, or may already be 100 years old. How many Maddock Madstones have you seen in your life? I bet for most of you, it's none. So if you ever do find an antique urinal like this, whether it's a pedestal or something else, take a moment and admire it. This is something that you'll never see made ever again. This urinal is a true classic. I don't think I really need to explain much to it. But as of now, this urinal is more of a novelty than anything, and probably very expensive if one is for sale, let's be real here. This is perfect as a collectible, or to show off in places like historic buildings, if you can find one for cheap, you know. Or like a custom install, like in your man cave or something like that. I don't know, go wild. But this is definitely a urinal I wouldn't really put in a public restroom, especially considering that it's at risk for getting worn out. But this particular one has been well maintained and still lives on 100 years later. This is something truly you will rarely see ever again, so do admire it. That being said though, I'd have to give a value of 6 because this is something you don't want to put in a public bathroom, especially for its water consumption. Only in certain criteria will this urinal be worth getting, like as a collectible or something. So if you find one, I'd advise you to buy it, especially if you want to mess around with it and do custom stuff with it. And the final score of the original Maddock Madstone urinal is a 41 out of 50, which equates to an 82 out of 100. While there might not be much point of buying a pedestal urinal in general due to its severe water usage, as well as being the fact that it could easily be another toilet in its place, the pedestal urinal has always been a very interesting novelty of its past. And this antique Maddock Madstone is no different. The fact that some of these are still in existence to this very day is nothing short of a miracle. And this particular Maddock Madstone is almost, or already is, 100 years old, which is crazy to think about. But it is something of a true classic of the good old and early 1900s. Cherish it while you can, because these are no longer made.